The power of vulnerability will lead you to the right people, which will ultimately connect you to the right tribe. The power of vulnerability, even though you may have to kiss a few frogs, if you want a life partner, will lead you to that life partner. And lastly, the power of vulnerability with others will help you with being more vulnerable with yourself, which ultimately will help you trust yourself. And then from there, will help you with understanding your intuition. So if you are honest with yourself, if you're vulnerable with yourself, if your intuition is sending off red flags, you won't ignore those red flags when it comes to connecting with other people. And you will easily navigate and move around if you run into somebody that isn't right for you. So with us having this knowledge and information, because the internet is so massive, why do we avoid vulnerability? If you are somebody who avoids vulnerability, I challenge you to think about your relationship with the word vulnerability. And how does it make you feel like, and what does it look like in real life today, right? Like, what does that relationship look like with the word vulnerability? And then from there, peel back the layers and think about your relationship throughout the years with vulnerability, from adolescence all the way up. Were you rejected in school? Maybe you were rejected by somebody you really cared about and it scarred you a little bit, and now you don't want to put yourself out there. Or maybe you come from a family who lacked vulnerability, who lacked expressing their feelings. I do want to mention that there's a difference between your actions versus vulnerability. And I say this because for a long time, I confused my actions in relationships with vulnerability. And I'll give you an example of my own life on how I confused the two. And for a long time, I thought I led with vulnerability. And I thought that it was common sense for someone to give me love because I was giving them love. But in reality, I was just doing, and I wasn't expressing any of my needs. I wasn't being vulnerable at all because I didn't know how to do that. It wasn't modeled to me. And it was extremely uncomfortable for me to put myself out there in any type of way of being in need because of the boxes and the roles that I put myself in. So I'll give you guys an example from my life and just kind of how I worked through that. So I watched my mother in my childhood sacrifice a lot for me and my siblings. She would go out of her way to just make sure we were good, make sure we had security and we had stability. That was her main thing. She wanted to make sure that we were stable. My father also was in my life, and he, in his own ways, sacrificed for us as well. But as I got older and I ventured off into this healing journey, one of the things I realized was I knew nothing about my parents. Like, I knew nothing about their childhoods. I knew nothing about their relationships with their parents. I knew nothing about how they related to their peers. Like, didn't tell, at least me, I don't think they told any of us nothing. Like, we knew nothing. And with that shows a lack of vulnerability there. So all we really did, we watched our parents just work together to survive. Like, there was nothing else outside of that. So for a long time, vulnerability looked like, okay, if you care about someone, you do what needs to be done within that relationship. And that was it. Like, it didn't matter how I felt about it. And as far as like my compass system of, oh, is this right for me? Is it wrong for me? I had no guidance within that. And I didn't know what that looked like. So vulnerability to me was really an action word. Like, okay, being vulnerable was just, okay, you do, and that was love, right? So that was vulnerability to me. And then you just expect that in return, like without really sitting down and talking about it, without really sitting down and understanding who you were, what your needs were. Vulnerability was an action word to me, and that was it. Which vulnerability, to a certain degree, yeah, there's actions within it, but it's not just straight action. So there was that within my household. And then in elementary school, I was told that I talked way too much. And that kind of dumbed down kind of how I communicated, along with other things that happened to me in school. I got picked on. I got picked on, and again, teachers telling me I spoke out too much, or other little things here and there also kind of dimmed me down. And what it did for me was I hid myself. So that was that. And then also within our household, we all kind of stayed to ourselves. My parents it was kind of them against the world in this way. We weren't really close to our family members. I'm 34 years old. I've never attended a family reunion. We really didn't know our outside family members, and it was taught to us out loud and subconsciously to not trust people. Also, on top of not trusting people, it was if you had any issues, you figure it out on your own because people probably don't give a damn anyway. So with all of these different things that kind of was in the mix for me in regards to my vulnerability, I expressed all of it within action, whether it was, now that I think on it, if it was just to get approval from people that I felt like that I cared about, and also for me to just kind of hide myself, like, let me hide just all of, I guess, my insecurities, my thought processes, and just, it's an action. This is connecting with people, is just an action. It's just doing. You're working to reach a goal or to solve problems. Like, that's all I saw growing up. So that's what vulnerability looked like to me. And just with all of that being mixed up and mixed in adulthood, and especially dating and relationships, what that led me to was dealing with men with a lot of trauma, dealing with men who made me work for their love, for their affection, because love was modeled to me as an action word. That was it. That's the only part I understood as a child, and I carried that out. So I never fully got the other pieces of, okay, within a relationship, it's more than just you following orders or taking action. Like, you also need to feel safe in your body. You also need to feel safe within the relationship so you can communicate your own needs, so I can be vulnerable enough to express how I felt for real. That wasn't modeled to me. Like, I didn't see my parents communicate to each other in that way. And now that I think about it, one thing that I remember is my mom showing my dad grace and him not showing her that same grace. And the way she showed grace was through her actions and not so much with her words. So that was something else, not fully understanding how to communicate how I felt because of just how I saw things play out within the household as well. So with my last traumatic but transformative relationship, because I was able to really sit down and analyze myself, like, why do I keep going through these toxic ass relationships? I was able to, one of the things I identified was that I was not vulnerable at all, even though I thought I was, because I felt empathy and sympathy for other people and went out of my way to do. I missed somewhere along the lines where I needed to be vulnerable so I could also receive the same things. So if you're someone who struggles with vulnerability, whether it's similar to mine or you're way on the other end, think about your relationship with the word. Think about what vulnerability means to you right now and list those things out. Look up the definition of vulnerability and then compare and see like if there's any differences between the true definition of vulnerability. Let's look up the word vulnerability. The quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. So when you think of your relationship with vulnerability, are you somebody who's super defensive? Are you somebody who does everything in your power to ensure that there's no way somebody could penetrate your armor, whether that's through your actions, whether that's through the things that you say? Like, really think on your relationship with the word vulnerability and how it's displayed when you interact with people, right? And then just write it down, journal it out, bring it to light. Like how you act, what is your relationship with vulnerability? And from there, once you have that down, you understand what vulnerability is, you understand how you express vulnerability or you don't express vulnerability in your life. The next step is to start small, because being vulnerable is hard. Like, it's hard, especially when you are someone who has navigated away from that for so long because you're afraid of what people may think, being rejected. But at the end of the day, when you are able to be authentic with yourself and then put it out there for other people, you bring in the right people. You don't have to tiptoe and walk on eggshells, do the most to just fit in. Like, when you are vulnerable and you are being in your truth, whether it's good or bad. I know something small for me was, at first it was dancing around the word no, until I realized for me that no was a complete sentence. Now, this is vulnerability to me because I picked up the savior complex. I picked up she's the go-to. And I took pride in being that. But there were times where I didn't want to be that. And I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to just take myself out of that box for a very long time. So for me, it was slowly building up boundaries and being able to be firm with my no's and really understand where I ended where I began. So other people knew where it ended with me, because lines would get blurred, boundaries would get blurred, crossed, and I didn't know where I ended, where I began. And just to fit this box of savior, of fix it girl, I allowed that. And with me allowing that, especially in dating and relationships, no one was really able to build a true bond with me, because I never let it be known like how I felt or where I needed help or where I may have needed areas of fixing for myself. You know, I didn't understand how that would work for me in a relationship for a very, very long time. You may be somebody who wants to look unfazed all the time, but deep down inside, you do feel some type of way about things. So in your case, you may need to be honest about how you feel, or maybe you need to be honest about a mistake you may have made. And from there, learn not to shut down or not to get distant, because you want to keep that facade of not being fazed by nothing. Start small with people you care about. Build that trust within yourself and build that trust with them. And then that will fester out to anyone that you get in contact with. And then from there, you being able to be vulnerable and just be authentic, you will easily, like I said, you'll understand your kind of your intuition, your own kind of guidance post and system when connecting with other people, and people that either can't be vulnerable with you on the same level, or people you just can't be vulnerable with at all. Like, you'll let them go with ease. You won't try to chase. You won't try to prove. You'll just let them go, which will lead you closer to, like I said, a life partner, you finding your tribe. And ultimately, the most important thing is your relationship with yourself, trusting yourself so you can get all of the things that you want in life. So I'm hoping that this episode helped. I'm hoping that kind of sharing my journey with vulnerability and just how I'm navigating through that, and how I'm learning to be more vulnerable with other people, be more vulnerable with myself, so I can trust myself to pick the right people in my life. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll be back next week with another episode.